had this whole physicality.
Yeah.
And I was doing like a rehearsal, and the director goes, "What are you doing with your body, man?" And I said, "Oh, I was just thinking wolves are like they're always smelling and they're looking down because they're actually."
It was supposed to be Marvel's next big comeback, the X-Men finally joining the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But behind the scenes, chaos is brewing. Reports say Disney tried to slash the salaries of the stars who brought the mutants to life. And now, the entire cast is walking away. So how did the dream of an X-Men revival turn into a Hollywood nightmare? The X-Men franchise has always been one of the most beloved in superhero history. From Hugh Jackman's legendary run as Wolverine to Patrick Stewart's Professor X and Ian McKellen's Magneto, these films built a legacy long before the MCU dominated the box office. But when Disney acquired Fox in 2019, the rights to the X-Men officially came under Marvel Studios. Fans expected a glorious reboot, with new actors, new stories, and the mutants finally standing side by side with the Avengers. Yet, as production rumors began swirling, another story emerged. Disney wasn't willing to pay the cast what they believed they were worth. And when the studio tried to cut their salaries, the stars pushed back. Hard. So how did Disney, the most powerful studio in Hollywood, lose the trust of one of its most valuable franchises? Before Marvel's Avengers ruled the world, the X-Men were the kings of superhero cinema. Beginning with X-Men in 2000, the franchise ran for nearly 2 decades, spawning sequels, prequels, and spin-offs like Logan and Deadpool. These films didn't just make billions at the box office. They shaped the entire superhero genre. Hugh Jackman became synonymous with Wolverine. Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen brought Shakespearean gravitas to Professor X and Magneto. Jennifer Lawrence, James McAvoy, and Michael Fassbender breathed new life into the franchise in its later years. But with the Disney-Fox merger, the future of these characters was thrown into uncertainty. Would Marvel keep the same cast or reboot from scratch? And if they kept them, what would it cost to bring these stars back? That question set the stage for the conflict now unfolding. Disney may be one of the richest companies in the world, but the studio has faced mounting criticism for how it handles talent contracts. From Scarlett Johansson suing over Black Widow's streaming release to actors publicly voicing frustrations with low pay compared to billion-dollar profits, Disney has earned a reputation for being ruthless in negotiations. When talks began with the X-Men cast, insiders say Disney tried to restructure contracts to cut salaries significantly. For stars who had carried the franchise for years, this felt like an insult. Some had already taken pay cuts in earlier films for the promise of long-term rewards. Now, they were being told their value was less than ever. The result? Frustration, anger, and eventually, open talk of walking away. But which actors led the charge in saying enough is enough? For years, the X-Men actors have been the faces of a billion-dollar franchise. Hugh Jackman alone carried Wolverine through 9 films, his performances defining not just the character, but an entire era of superhero cinema. Michael Fassbender and James McAvoy reinvented Magneto and Professor X, earning critical praise. Jennifer Lawrence, despite her rocky relationship with the franchise, gave mainstream appeal as Mystique. So when Disney reportedly offered contracts with slashed salaries, many of these actors balked. After decades of work, how could the studio undervalue them now, especially when Marvel films routinely gross over $1 billion? Behind closed doors, frustration grew. Hugh Jackman had come out of Wolverine retirement for Deadpool 3. But with Disney's offers, insiders say he considered it his final appearance. Others echoed the same sentiment. If Disney didn't value their contributions, they'd rather walk away. It wasn't just about the money. It was about respect. These actors had built a franchise that existed long before the MCU became a juggernaut. and now they were being treated as if they were disposable. But why did Disney think the cast would accept these cuts in the first place? Disney has been riding high for years, dominating the box office with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But in recent years, cracks have begun to show. Films like Eternals, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and even Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness underperformed expectations. The company is under immense pressure to cut costs, especially after billion-dollar streaming losses on Disney+. Rebooting the X-Men was supposed to be a safe bet, a way to reignite fan excitement while keeping budgets lean. Disney likely assumed the actors would accept smaller salaries for the prestige of joining the MCU. But here's where the studio miscalculated. The X-Men cast didn't need Marvel anymore. Hugh Jackman, James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, and Jennifer Lawrence are all established stars with successful careers outside of the franchise. They weren't desperate for the work, and Disney underestimated their willingness to walk away. By trying to save money, Disney may have jeopardized the very reboot fans were waiting for. So the question became, would the studio cave to the demands of the actors, or risk losing the entire cast? Negotiations between Disney and the X-Men cast dragged on, but instead of moving closer to resolution, things only grew more hostile. The actors wanted contracts that reflected their legacy and the billion-dollar profits they had helped generate. Disney, however, stuck to its cost-cutting strategy. This tug-of-war eventually reached a breaking point. Multiple cast members reportedly made it clear. If the studio didn't meet their demands, they would not return for future films. Hugh Jackman, whose return as Wolverine was supposed to be Marvel's crown jewel in Deadpool 3 and beyond, began hinting this would truly be his last ride. Jennifer Lawrence, long critical of the franchise's heavy prosthetics and long shooting days, had no interest in returning under a pay cut. James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender, who had already said their goodbyes to the X-Men after Dark Phoenix, were unwilling to revisit their roles without fair compensation. For Disney, this was a nightmare scenario. Losing one actor was manageable. Losing the entire cast? That could destroy the franchise before it even began. But if Disney thought they could quietly replace the actors and move forward, they underestimated one thing: the fans. The moment whispers of Disney's salary cuts and cast walkouts began circulating online, fans erupted. Social media lit up with hashtags like #PayTheXmen and #RespectTheCast. For years, audiences had waited for the X-Men to join the MCU. But what they didn't want was a cheap reboot with new faces and watered-down storytelling. Fans argued that if Marvel could pay Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans massive salaries for their roles, then the X-Men actors, who carried the superhero genre through the early 2000s, deserved the same respect. Memes, videos, and petitions flooded the internet, with many accusing Disney of greed. Some even threatened to boycott future Marvel films if the studio refused to meet the cast's demands. The backlash was so intense that it began to overshadow other Marvel projects, fueling the narrative that Disney had lost touch with its fans. In an industry where perception matters as much as profit, Disney suddenly found itself painted as the villain. So the question was no longer just about contracts, it was about credibility. Would Disney risk alienating both its stars and its audience in the same breath? When the backlash hit, Disney knew it had to act. The studio's reputation was already under fire due to declining box office numbers and criticism of Phase 4's direction. Adding an X-Men scandal to the list could have been catastrophic. Executives scrambled to manage the narrative. Publicly, they remained vague, emphasizing Marvel's long-term vision for the X-Men and promising fans they would be satisfied with what was coming. Privately, however, insiders say Disney began reconsidering its hardline stance. Losing the X-Men cast would not just anger fans, it could also make investors nervous about Disney's ability to manage its newly acquired properties. Some reports even suggested the studio floated the idea of offering tiered contracts, with higher pay for returning legacy stars like Hugh Jackman, while recasting secondary characters with cheaper, lesser-known actors. But this half-measure only risked further resentment. The cast wanted solidarity, not favoritism. And here's where Disney faced its biggest dilemma. Should it cave to the cast's demands and risk ballooning budgets, or stick to its cuts and risk destroying the X-Men reboot before it even began? The X-Men aren't just another Marvel property. They're a cornerstone of the comic universe, with decades of stories and one of the largest fan bases in the world. For Disney, the mutants were supposed to be the big reset button, the answer to waning MCU excitement after Avengers Endgame. But with the entire cast threatening to walk away, the future suddenly looks shaky. Will Disney risk a full recast, introducing an entirely new lineup of X-Men? Or will it find a way to compromise and bring back the stars who made the franchise iconic in the first place? Fans are divided. Some argue a fresh reboot is necessary, with younger actors who can carry the MCU for the next decade. Others believe the magic of the X-Men lies in the performances that already defined them. Replacing those actors would feel like erasing history. The uncertainty leaves Marvel Studios walking a tightrope. They need the X-Men to reinvigorate their universe, but mishandling the negotiations could alienate the very audience they need to win back. So as the dust settles, one question hangs over everything. Is Disney willing to pay the price to save the X-Men? Or will the franchise become another casualty of corporate greed? The X-Men controversy isn't happening in isolation. Over the past few years, Disney has faced repeated clashes with its own talent. Scarlett Johansson's lawsuit over Black Widow's streaming release highlighted how Disney prioritized Disney plus profits over theatrical deals. High-profile directors, including those behind Doctor Strange and Eternals, have spoken about creative interference. Even major stars like Anthony Mackie and Elizabeth Olsen have subtly voiced frustrations with long hours, heavy contracts, and pay disputes. The X-Men cast walking away would only add fuel to the fire. If Disney can't keep its actors happy, actors who have already proven they can carry billion-dollar films, what does that say about its future with up-and-coming talent? This is about more than salaries. It's about trust. For decades, Marvel thrived on the loyalty of its stars, building careers for people like Chris Hemsworth and Tom Holland. But loyalty only lasts so long when studios are seen as exploiting talent. If Disney doesn't change its approach, the risk isn't just losing the X-Men. It's losing the faith of the entire Hollywood talent pool. And if that happens, could the Marvel Cinematic Universe survive the fallout? The MCU was once unstoppable, a cinematic juggernaut culminating in Avengers Endgame. But since then, the magic has been harder to capture. Audiences are more critical, box office returns are shakier, and Marvel's future depends heavily on reintroducing iconic characters like the Fantastic Four and the X-Men. But if the X-Men reboot collapses under salary disputes, Marvel faces a crisis. Fans who have already grown tired of mediocre sequels and endless spin-offs may finally walk away for good. The studio's next decade of storytelling could unravel before it even begins. On the other hand, this controversy could also be a turning point. If Disney listens to its stars, pays them fairly, and treats them with respect, it could rebuild trust and set the stage for a true revival. The X-Men, after all, are about unity, resilience, and fighting against oppression. Values that resonate even more when reflected behind the scenes. So the question remains, will Disney learn from this and bring back the cast with the respect they deserve? Or will the X-Men saga end before it even has a chance to begin in the MCU? For over 2 decades, the X-Men have been more than just superheroes on a screen. They've been a cultural force, shaping the modern era of comic book films and inspiring millions around the world. But today, their future doesn't just depend on storylines or scripts. It depends on whether Disney can recognize the value of the stars who made the mutants legendary. The cast has spoken. They won't accept being undervalued. And fans have made their voices heard too. Respect the talent, or risk losing one of the most beloved franchises in history. Disney now stands at a crossroads. Will they learn from past mistakes, rebuild trust with their stars, and bring the X-Men into the MCU with the honor they deserve? Or will corporate greed and short-term cost-cutting bury the mutants before they even get their chance to rise again? So what do you think? Should Disney pay the stars what they're worth, or is it time for a complete reboot with new faces? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more untold stories from behind the scenes of Hollywood's biggest franchises. Because one thing is clear, the future of the X-Men isn't just about mutants, it's about respect, legacy, and whether Disney has what it takes to keep the magic alive.